Hi all, Anthony Wilson, the Public Information Officer for the City of San Angelo. We had a City Council meeting earlier this morning, and so as we are wont to do, we are following that up with a little debriefing about what happened during that meeting. And joining us today in order to talk about what happened is the Councilman, Harry Thomas. Harry is one of our budget hawks. He's a retired accountant, so we thought it would be good to sit down and talk with him about what happened today, because this morning we engaged in the first of two scheduled budget workshops for the fiscal year 2019 budget, and that budget will take effect on October the 1st. So, Councilman, thanks for being with us.
Appreciate it, Anthony. First time in the studio. It's pretty impressive.
Thank you. I think so too. So, as I said this morning, the council engaged in a budget workshop, and you were reviewing some enterprise funds, which are self-supporting budgets that don't rely upon sales or property taxes. And this includes our water fund, our wastewater fund, the airport fund, the solid waste fund, some others. What struck you about today's discussion?
Well, I think it's an education for some of the council people to ask some very detailed questions about what these funds do and specific lines on each one. These self-sustaining funds really help with the infrastructure of the city, drive some things like at the fort, the airport, and so those funds are important. But citizens need to understand that not everything in the city is driven by sales or property tax.
Yeah, so like I said, these are enterprise funds because they're self-supporting, so they don't rely upon sales tax, they don't rely upon property tax. They all have to generate their own revenue in order to fund their operations. Like you said, that happens at Fort Concho or with civic events or the airport.
Right, it is, and I think those things are important. We talked a little bit this morning about stormwater, and I think there was some clarification for some of the council people this morning about stormwater and those fees and what drives that. And basically, those fees come out of the state or the federal government that talk about quality of water. They don't necessarily talk about the quantity of water, and we don't know that we've got some issues that we're going to have to address at some time in the future. Especially since we just had the rain we had this past weekend when it comes to some low-lying areas within the community. And we've got some ideas on some of those. Some of those are going to be fixed as we get ready to do some of these streets. Bell Street, for example, and East Angelo Draw. We've got some opportunities with fixing the Avenue P flooding area. We have a solution in mind and should be fully in place by next spring. We've got some opportunities over on College Hills, Foster Road. Those things we're already addressing. One of the other things we're doing as we build new neighborhoods is we're making sure that we capture that water and instead of having those impervious surfaces feed it to the street and then ultimately feed it downstream.
You're in your third year of service on the City Council, so this is your third budget cycle. As I mentioned, you are an accountant by trade, and so I know that you really like to dig into the budget and into the numbers. Was there anything that you heard this morning that was a bit surprising to you, or maybe a revelation of some sort?
Well, really not. And again, what I tell the citizens on a regular basis is that this is not my first rodeo, and because of that, I follow numbers every month. I was one that asked the budget group, the accounting area for the city, to feed numbers to all the council people 2.5 years ago. And we get a monthly boob look now that looks at every one of those particular funds. In the first couple of months, as I do with a lot of budgets, I sit down with a calculator and went line by line so I knew exactly what was in there. And so I study those every month. Just received one about 10 days ago, so it was very relevant as we looked at it. I took it with me this morning just in case there were any questions on that particular one. But I think the key to it is relatively new council members may not have had that same opportunity. So there's an education process. I think what we understand is like for the airport fund, for example, most of that's made up from the passenger fund or from grants from the federal FAA. So those types of things people need to keep in mind as we go forward, and what you can do at the airport and what you can't, because those monies don't come out of the general fund.
When you sit down with that blue book, which is what we call it simply because it has a blue cover
Right.
each month, and go over those financials, is there anything in particular that you're sort of focusing on and looking at in order to determine what the financial condition of any particular department is?
Well, utilize knowing that a specific month in that budget. So I look to see whether or not, for example, last one I had we're 9 months into that particular budget cycle, and you take a look to see how many of those lines are 75 or below and how many of them are above, and you also take a look and see what the revenue is on those particular lines. So you look to see if your expenses are exceeding your revenue or vice versa, so you know how much that money is going to go back into your fund balance, or are you going to take a hit on your fund balance this particular year as you go forward. So I looked at those to make sure that we're going to try to balance this as it were, or are we going to have some opportunities for the next year?
And I want to make clear to our viewers, when Councilman Thomas talks about fund balance, that is unspent revenues from prior years. So when our revenues exceed our expenses from prior years, it builds up a sort of a savings account, if you will. We had a former mayor who called it our rainy day fund, and so those are funds that help address unforeseen circumstances throughout the budget year. So as we looked across these enterprise funds this morning, Councilman, how would you generally describe their financial and budgetary condition?
Sure. For the most part, we're in very, very good shape. So as we're taking a look at these particular funds this year, I think we're going to be really able to budget a zero or a positive budget in this thing. One thing that interests me probably more than anything, any of the other funds this morning, was the Fort Concho and the State Building Fund. I was on the Fort Concho board for 6 years, and so I always looked at those particular numbers with it. We're coming up in the next few years on actually paying those two buildings off. And so it will be interesting to see what Carl and Bob and the Fort Concho board suggest as we go forward. There's a possibility that could help be a self-sustaining organization where they'll get less and less general funds, and I think that's the direction that we're probably going to go in that one. So I take special care every month to monitor that one to see where we are. And I know that based on the information that we got this morning, we're relatively within the next 3 or 4 years we're going to be able to get that completed.
You mentioned general funds, and that sort of segues perfectly into my next question, because what a lot of people don't realize is the city budget is actually a collection of a lot of different budgets when we talk about the water fund and the wastewater fund and the Fort Concho fund. But the one that people seem to focus on the most, and when I say people, I'm talking about the public and the city council, is our general fund,
right,
because that's the portion of the budget that's supported by sales and property taxes. Talk a little bit about the importance of the general fund to the organization, to the services that we provide, and why the city council spends so much time sort of honing in on that particular budget.
Well, typically, when you take a look at the general fund, it's the one that drives any increases in salaries, any increases in benefits, and we know that medical costs have traditionally gone up every year, and we anticipate it's going to be the same for fiscal year 19. So as you take a look at things like pay raises for the employees, for the firefighters, for the police officers, they'll come out of the general fund. That particular fund really, as you say, is generated by sales and property tax. So as we take a look at that, how much do you have to spend on those things that you want to do next year? The council has some ideas of how they want to spend that money, what's important. I know that we've got some opportunities along the river for bank stabilization. I know that we've had some, in past years, we've taken some monies and utilized it to upgrade facilities. We've always, since I've been on council, took a look at them for increases in salaries and how we can do those. We've also got to look at aging equipment. vehicles that are needed in certain departments, fire trucks, ambulances, police cars, all those things basically end up coming out of the general fund, and we got to figure out how many of those we can do every year.
As I mentioned, this morning's budget workshop was the first of 2 that are scheduled. The next one will be in 2 weeks from today, and on that date you'll be talking about the general fund in particular. What do you anticipate will be the focus of those discussions?
Well, I think there's going to be some questions on police officer salaries. I think they want to go back and take a look at that longevity pay that was lost when the meet and confer went away. Do know that firefighters are talking about compression pay, and that's their drivers are making almost as much as their lieutenants are, and their lieutenants are making almost as much as their captains. So it makes it a little difficult for them to talk about promotions. Why would I want to go ahead and take on some more responsibility if I'm going to get basically the same amount of money? So they're going to talk about that. Talk about the need for additional police cars. Talk about how we're going to fund, you know, any new ambulances. I think we're going to be looking also at increases in benefits. As I said earlier, medical cost we know has gone up. So how can we fund those things without making it difficult for the employees for the City of San Angelo?
And so you mentioned about police officers and firefighters. And of course, the police chief has requested more officers. Do you anticipate there being more of those officers and firefighters in the coming year's budget?
Well, yes, not more than the requested 5, but I suspect that that's going to be there. I'm not sure that we're going to get any more firefighters. We added a new ambulance crew this last year, and I don't think that there's going to be any additional requests from the firefighters for additional personnel right now. Do know that they've still got, I believe, 9 in the academy, and they'll be graduating towards the end of the year, first part of next year. And so I think right at the moment, that'll take care of those things. As we take a look at some of the other things, though, I do know that we've got some aging police cars, and that may end up being something that we take a look at before the end of this fiscal year, but it may generate some discussion as to whether or not we want to push any of those into fiscal year 19.
You mentioned about pay for firefighters and police officers. How do you weigh what you do for them versus what you do for civilian employees?
Well, most people have heard me say this more than once over the last 2+ years since I've been there. You got to take care of that guy or gal that's in that ditch at midnight in the middle of winter when they're repairing a water line or a sewer line. They're just as important as your first responders are at that particular time. You got to take care of those individuals that are putting together the budget numbers. Those individuals that take care of those inspections. So making sure that the rest of the 900 people, or whatever that figure is, get taken care of is very, very important to me. So we always talk about first responders, and one of the things when I'm out in the community we talk about with citizens is we want to take care of the first responders. And I said, great. Do you know that your property tax does not even cover the fire and police budgets? Whoa, no. I said, yeah, it's got to be made up by the sales tax. And I said, then that comes out of the rest of the things that we're going to do in the city. So most citizens will tell you that they want to take care of them, but also most citizens are satisfied that the council hasn't moved forward in an increase in property tax rate.
It reminds me of my former life when I was a newspaper reporter and I was a city hall reporter, and a wizened city manager told me we can do anything the citizens want, it just takes money.
It does.
So sales tax collections are trending upward right now, which is a good sign for our local economy. How much easier does that make your job in setting and approving a budget for the coming year?
Well, it's great. I mean, it makes it much easier. As we take a look at those anticipated revenues, what we've seen in the last 15 months is an increase of sales tax. I just went to the Chamber of Commerce luncheon, and Dr. Clifford Jones from ASU Business made a presentation, and a lot of it focused on increased sales tax and talked about where we are. It's great when you've got that opportunity to have those monies so that you can do other things. The one thing that citizens need to understand is that our commercial tax base, our sales tax base, is not near as great as some of our sister cities. And so because of that, we have an opportunity. The more commercial businesses, and I think most citizens have heard the mayor say this, more commercial businesses that we get in here, the greater opportunity they are to make that sales tax increase. So to go back to your original question, Anthony, I mean, it makes it much easier. When we were in budget discussions 2 years ago and sales tax were down, there were a lot of times that we sit with consternation and said, what can we do and what can we not do? Certainly want to take care of the employees, make sure that we give them the raise that's appropriate. But in some cases, you just can't do those types of things. This year will be much easier.
The council is already committed to capping the property tax rate where it has been for the last 5 years at 77.6 cents. The mayor last week said that she does not believe the time is right to lower the tax rate given the needs of the community and of the organization. Do you agree? And if so, why do you think keeping the tax rate where it is the right move at this time?
Well, again, and I'll go back and say what I said about sales tax. The reason that the property tax rate is where it is, in comparison to our sister cities, they've got much greater sales tax. And until we can grow that commercial base and get 40–50% more sales tax every month, we're going to have to leave the property tax rate at where it is. Most of that, again, goes to fund the first responders. And so from that standpoint, we've got to be able to can do that. I don't think in my lifetime we're going to see that sales tax rate move much further lower, simply because it takes so long to get the commercial businesses built up in the city.
So if people want to share a thought with you about either the budget or any other city issue, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, of course, they can contact me through the city's website. You know, it's easy, harry.thomas@costatx.us. You can get hold of me almost any time. I deal with people all over the community, and sometimes I tell them, if you're a friend of mine, then I'll do it. I'll take care of it for you. But if you just know me by name, it may be easier if you have a conversation with your councilman first. If they can't do it, then I'll work with you.
All right, very good. So we've been talking with Councilman Harry Thomas. He represents District 3 on the City Council. And as we have been doing after each City Council meeting, we'll be back here next Tuesday. That's the date of a regular City Council meeting. That will be August the 21st. And then on August the 28th, the Council will again engage in another budget workshop, and we'll be back here to talk about that as well. So stay tuned to our Facebook page or watch us on SATV Suddenlink Channel 17 for a debriefing after each City Council meeting. We like to call it Council Catch-Up.